New York was experiencing one of the harshest days of winter. As snowflakes fell from the sky to the ground, the heavy traffic and bustle of Fifth Avenue continued. People were wrapped in their coats and walking in a hurry. Some were shopping, others were trying to get to business meetings. But in this bustling crowd, there was someone no one noticed. Donald Trump was walking alone in the center of the city that day. Although he usually walks with his bodyguards, he had a different plan for that day. He wanted to take a short break from big business deals, to be alone and think for a while. He was wearing a long black coat and a red tie around his neck. As the cold air hit his face, he tried to feel the energy of New York, but something caught his attention as he walked. In the corner, a young woman in an old and slightly worn brown coat stood with a plastic bag in her hand. Next to her were two small children. One of the children was clinging tightly to the sleeve of his mother's coat. The other was staring silently at the floor. With trembling hands, the woman opened her purse, checked inside, and closed it again. Trump paused for a moment, as if the hundreds of people passing him by never saw this young mother and her children. The crowd, caught up in the speed of New York, continued on their way without noticing them. But Trump could not remain indifferent to such things. He had met many people in his life, heard many different stories. But this scene made him feel something different. He looked carefully at her face. It wasn't just tiredness, it was desperation. The little boy next to him held his mother's hand tighter. His cheeks flushed with cold, and his lips slightly trembling caught Trump's attention. In that moment, he made an instinctive decision. This woman and these children needed help, and he was not going to ignore it, he thought to himself. Maybe I can change this moment for them. He took a deep breath and slowed his pace, moving towards her. When the woman realized he was approaching, her eyes widened in a brief moment of panic. Perhaps someone was going to say something bad to her. Maybe some stranger was going to walk right past her, averting his eyes. But Trump stopped right in front of her and asked in a kind and calm voice, "Hello, ma'am. How can I help you?" The woman paused for a brief moment. Her eyes seemed to recognize Trump's face, but she wasn't sure if it was really his. I'm just trying to get food for my children," she said, her voice trembling. Trump shook his head slowly. In that moment, she knew that this conversation was only the beginning. Her voice was trembling. The uncertainty and desperation in her eyes was palpable. Trump listened intently to what she said. One of the children next to him leaned his head against his mother's leg, while the other clutched the sleeve of his coat with his small hands. "I'm just trying to buy food for my children." This sentence made Trump think. He had worked with a lot of people in his life, made million-dollar deals. But here, on a cold New York evening, for this young mother and her children, even the simplest thing had become a big deal. He glanced around them. The crowd was still hurrying along. Some people were window shopping, others talking on their cell phones. No one seemed to notice the plight of this mother and her children. But for Trump, noticing was not enough. He had to act. He looked at her kindly and said in a warm voice, "Let's get something to eat first, shall we?" She looked up in surprise. She looked at him with an expression of disbelief. The children did not fully understand this sudden offer. "Follow me," he said, and started walking towards the restaurant next door. The woman hesitated for a moment. A stranger, especially someone like Donald Trump, offering to help her so directly. It was not something she was used to, but he looked at his children, their cheeks reddened by the cold, their eyes glazed over with hunger, and she instinctively nodded and followed Trump. The hot air hit them as they walked through the door of the restaurant. Trump greeted the waiters with a slight nod and headed for one of the large tables in the corner. As the waiter approached them, ready to take their order, Trump spoke directly. "Please bring the best food and hot chocolate for the kids." She had not expected such a generous offer. Her eyes filled with tears. "Really, you don't have to do that, Mr. Trump, ... Trump smiled slightly. "Everyone has difficult times in their lives. The important thing is to know that you are not alone in those times." The woman bowed her head gratefully. For the first time that day, the children's eyes shone with excitement. The food soon arrived. The children ate with appetite, and their mother breathed a sigh of relief for the first time in a long time. Trump sat across the table and watched them silently. He had a strong feeling that he had done something right, but this story would not end here. Because Trump wasn't going to stop at just buying them one meal. As she ate, the woman occasionally glanced at Trump out of the corner of her eye. She still couldn't believe her situation. A few minutes earlier, she had been on a cold sidewalk worrying about her children, and now she was dining in a warm restaurant with one of New York's most famous businessmen. Trump noticed her surprise and spoke with a smile. "What's your name?" The woman slowly put down her spoon and looked up. "Isabella. Isabella Carter." Trump nodded and said, "That's a beautiful name." Then carefully he added, "I want to hear your story, Isabella. How did you end up in this situation?" She hadn't expected this question, but Trump's sincere look told her that he really wanted to listen. Sighing, she began to speak. "Actually, it all started a few years ago. My husband and I had a happy life. But after she died in an accident, everything changed. I was left alone with my 2 children. At first we were managing, but with the rent, the bills, the kids' expenses, everything got out of control." Trump listened, nodding slowly. "At first I worked a few jobs, but I needed a job with flexible hours so I could take care of my children. Eventually I got a job in a small cafe. But last month, when business was bad, they laid me off. Since then, I've been doing my best to support my children, but times are hard." Her voice was shaking as she spoke. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she tried not to cry. Trump could see that she was trying to stay strong, and that's when his inner business person came into play. He began to think about what this woman needed, not what she wanted. "Isabella," he said in a gentle tone, "you want to work, you want to give your children a better life, but no one gave you a chance?" Isabella nodded her head slightly in agreement. Trump was silent for a few seconds. Then he took out his phone and typed a short message. Isabella looked at him in surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked. Trump put his phone in his pocket and replied with a smile, "I have a solution for you." Isabella didn't understand what was happening, but Trump wasn't going to stop at just buying her a meal, because his favors were always for the long term. Isabella didn't know what Trump's message meant, but there was determination in her eyes. She didn't just want to do a temporary favor. He was not looking for a momentary favor, but to create lasting change. Within minutes, a luxurious black SUV pulled up outside the restaurant. When the door opened, a smartly dressed man got out and walked toward the restaurant. Isabella looked at Trump in surprise. "Who is this?" she asked. "This is one of my personal assistance team. We have a fund that deals with things like job placement, financial support, and housing assistance. I want to give you an opportunity, Isabella." The woman's eyes widened. "But I didn't ask for help. I was just here to buy food for my children. Do you really want to do something like that for me?" Trump shook his head. "Sometimes people don't get the help they deserve. But I can see you're struggling. Nobody gave you this opportunity." "I do." Isabella could not hold back her tears. Her children, though they did not fully understand what was happening, noticed the change in their mother's eyes. Trump turned to the guard outside and spoke. "Arrange a suitable job for Isabella, a safe home, and a support fund for her children. Also, help her with living expenses for the first few months. She needs a fresh start, not just help." The man nodded and quickly began to make some arrangements on his phone. Isabella felt like she was in a dream. "Mr. Trump, I can't believe you're actually going to do this." Trump looked at her with a smile. "Sometimes a little help can change someone's life forever. I believe you and your children deserve a better life." It was one of the most powerful words Isabella had ever heard. Isabella still couldn't fully comprehend what Trump had said. A few hours ago, she and her children were desperately searching for a solution to avoid starvation. Now, one of the most powerful men in the world was offering her a new life. After completing his phone calls, the guard outside approached Trump and spoke with a slight nod. "It's all set, Mr. Trump. A safe home for Isabella and her children is ready. We also interviewed several companies to provide him with a job opportunity. We will make sure she chooses the one that best suits her skills." Isabella listened to the woman's words with tears in her eyes. She still found it hard to believe it was true. Trump turned to her with a smile and asked gently, "What do you think, Isabella? Are you ready for a fresh start?" She nodded, but her voice was shaking. I really don't know what to say. I don't think I deserve such a favor." Trump frowned slightly and spoke in a serious tone. "Look, Isabella, in this world sometimes people don't get what they deserve. You've been fighting for years, you haven't given up. You risked everything for your children. If anyone deserves help, it is you." These words were the most meaningful thing Isabella had heard in years. An involuntary smile spread across her face. In that moment, for the first time, she felt that she might actually have a future. Trump motioned for Isabella to get into the black SUV with her children. They will take you to your new home. There you will have a warm room, clean clothes, and a comfortable bed. Tomorrow morning, my team will contact you to organize your job interviews. An education and support fund has also been set up for you and your children, so you can really rebuild your life. She shook her head as she wiped away tears. Mr. Trump, I don't know how to thank you. Trump smiled slightly and shrugged. You don't have to thank me. Just one day you help someone else. That's enough. That sentence was engraved in Isabella's mind. One day he would change someone else's life. After the children got into the car, Isabella looked at Trump one last time. There was both gratitude and a new hope for the future in her eyes. The SUV began to move slowly, and Isabella and her children set off for their new life. As Trump watched them, he felt a sense of fulfillment. It was possible to change a life without grand gestures or headlines. For him, it seemed like an ordinary day. But for Isabella and his children, it was the most important day of their lives. What do you think about Donald Trump's gesture? Have you heard a similar story? Share it with us in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and true stories.